Welcome to the first video in the character modeling series focusing on the Bob character. So the purpose of this whole series is to make sure that you understand how to fully construct a 3D character, including rigging and skinning. And we're going to start with the Bob character, where you've been provided the concept drawings. And this will allow you to learn and make some mistakes maybe, and just learn from your mistakes and make sure you fully understand how to create a character in 3D from concepts before you start your mentor characters. So the first thing you're going to need is you're going to need to make sure you have a folder set up. So I have 3D construction. I've got week 2 modeling the head. And I have folders in here, but I have a Bob character model folder. And inside of that, I'm going to have concepts, models, and textures. Okay, so in our concepts, we need to make sure that the concept drawings are in there. We're going to save all our 3ds Max files in models, and any textures or painting we do, we can save in textures. So inside my concepts folder, I have my Bob concepts. Okay, so we're going to bring these into 3ds Max, and we're going to set them up as a material. We actually only need this first one, Bob 1, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Make sure you have 3ds Max open, and we're going to make sure we set up our units first. So we're going to go right up to customize. We're going to go to unit setup, and it's very important that you switch your units here to US standard feet with inches, and you want to make sure the default units here is set to feet. This way, if I create a box and I make it 6 foot tall, it's going to be measured in feet, not inches. So up here we've got feet with fractional inches. You can measure by 1/4 inch. That's as small as we need to measure by. And I'm going to click OK. So we're going to go ahead and open up the material editor. So you can hit M on the keyboard, and that's the shortcut to open this up. If yours doesn't look like mine, you might have the Slate material editor open. So if I close this, you can actually just go up to the material editor button here, and if you hold your mouse down, you'll see 2 options. So if I open the Slate material editor, this will open up with a totally different window, and this is going to be a node-based structure here. So we'll get into this down the road, but for now we want to keep things smaller and compact. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to switch this to compact, and we'll just work with this for now. So in your first material slot, you're going to click on the first one and rename it to concept or concepts, and I'm going to go to diffuse and click on the empty map button here, and we're going to bring in a bitmap. And we're going to search for our character concept. Okay, so I'm going to go through and find my folder. So in here I've got my concepts. I'm going to click on Bob 1. Before I open this, have a look down at the bottom and take note of the size of the image. This will help us keep it to scale. So you can actually round these numbers up or down, but I have 1183 by 1870 at the bottom, or 1810 at the bottom here. So I'm going to round this up and say it's 12 and then round down to 18. I'm just going to say the image is 12 by 18, and I'll even make a note, 12 by 18, and I'll explain this better in a second. So we're going to open that up. I'm going to click open. So we have our image here. I'm going to click this button here to go to the parent. This brings us back up out of the map area, back to the main part of the material. And we're going to do a couple of things here. So the first thing is, in the perspective viewport, you can maximize this. Just click maximize. And I'm going to go ahead and create a box for scale. So I'm going to click and drag in the viewport. And the height of the Bob character is 5'9". So for the height of the box, I'm going to put in 5'9". So you can use the up and down arrows here. And if you want it to be really accurate, he's actually 5'9 3/4, but anywhere between 5'9 and 5'10 is fine. So I've got it at 5'9¼ . And I'll actually just delete that. We'll make him an even 5'9". So this is the height of the character right here. We're going to use that box as reference. So the best thing to do is to take that box. You're going to right click on select and move, and we'll just center X, Y, and Z. You can also do this from the bottom here. And then I'll close this. And we'll just freeze this box for now. So I'm going to select the box, right click, and freeze selection. Alright, so from here we're going to set up the planes that we're going to use for the concepts in the background. So you can click on plane under edit geometry. I'm going to hit F, the shortcut for the front view. Okay, so in the front view I've got wireframe, and I want to set this to default shading. So back here we're going to click on plane, and we're going to click and drag to create a plane. And this is where we're going to have a look at our note, where I've got the image size was set to 12 by 18, and that's going to be 12 in the height and 18 in the length or width. So in our plane, if we move length here, that's the height of the plane, we're going to punch in 12. And then for the width, we'll punch in 18. And then if we just click and drag our concept onto the image or onto the plane, you'll notice the image is gray at first. You need to turn on in your materials, you need to turn on show shaded material in viewport. So you click this button, and then everything should show up in the viewport. Okay, so you can see here I've actually got these backwards. So 18 should have been the length, 12 should be the width. So no problem, we'll just switch that around. It's 18 by 12. And now that we've got that sorted out, you can see that there's no distortion in the image, so we can start using this to set up for our front and side view. And then we can start modeling from this image. So what we want to do next is we want to start setting up our layers and keeping our scene organized. So if you're used to Photoshop, you've got Photoshop layers on the side where you can organize different layers of your drawings. In 3ds Max, hopefully you've gone through this last semester, but we're going to use the Layer Explorer, and we're going to start keeping things organized with the Layer Explorer. So if you see a window like this when you open Layer Explorer, make sure you have everything here turned on, especially display geometry. Make sure these are all turned on. They'll be gray if you turn them off. And then you should be able to see everything inside the default layer. And you can notice that the box is frozen. If I wanted to hide the box, I can hide it. I can unfreeze it from here and freeze it. Okay, same thing with our plane. So I'll just bring that back together. So what we're going to do is you can keep that window open, but we're going to select the plane and we're going to name it concept. And I'm going to end up renaming it later because I want to split this into 2 different pieces. But for now we're going to take the concept, and if you go in and create a new layer, it's going to drop the object that was selected into the new layer. So we'll name the layer concepts. Alright, so right now we have a new layer. It's called concepts. Our concept drawing is in here, and I can hide it, I can freeze it. And right now concepts is the active layer. Alright, so if this layer is blue, you can see I can make the default layer active. Whatever layer is active, when we create new objects, it's going to automatically put them in the active layer. So now you want to keep an eye on your layers and make sure you're working in the correct layer. Alright, so from here we can actually close out. We're working in the concept layer for now. At this point we can take the concept and we can scale it down. And the easiest way to do this is to start with the pivot point. So if you go into hierarchy, you're going to click on Effect Pivot Only, and we're just going to move the pivot straight down. And if you want to scroll in with your mouse wheel to zoom, we're just going to line this up with the bottom of Bob's heel. Alright, so if you do this, you can turn off Effect Pivot Only, and then you can center your image. So again, you can do this from down here, just right clicking on the spinners, or you can right click on Select and Move. I tend to use this more often. Alright, so we have our image centered. The character is standing flat on the ground. Okay, so his feet line up with 0 on the grid. Now, if you go to the Scale tool, you can actually right click on Scale and use Offset Screen. So this is the easiest way to do this. You just have to click and drag to scale it down, and now it's scaling by the pivot, so his feet will stay planted on the ground. And we're just going to line up the top of his head at the top of the hair with the top of the box. So now we know this is set up to be modeled at 5'9". So at this point, we can close that. We no longer need this reference box, so I'm going to right click, choose Unfreeze All. You can select the reference box and we can delete that. I'm going to select the plane, and if you hit F3, it puts the whole thing in wireframe. If you hit F3 again, we go back to edged faces with F4. Okay, so F3 is wireframe. If I hit F3 again, it takes us back to default shading, and F4 adds the edged faces. Okay, you can also do this from up here, but we're going to be using F3 and F4 a lot. So F4 turns on edged faces. I'm going to select the plane. When we created the plane, we could have taken out these segments and saved some work, but you can see here we still have it set as a plane, so we can go into the length segments and width segments, and you can set length segments to 1. We'll do width segments to 2. That'll give us one line down the middle, and at this point you can right click, convert to editable poly, and we're now going to cut this image in half. So we're going to have a front view and a side view that we can line up. So at this point you can go up to where we've named it concepts. I'm going to name it front view, and then I'm going to detach the side view from this. So I'm going to click on polygon. We'll select this half, and you can go to detach under edit geometry. So we're going to find detach, and we want to make sure that we name this side view, and we're not going to click anything else here. We're going to completely detach this from the front view. So you can click OK, and then the simple thing to do now is to take that side view and just snap the rotation. So you can turn on rotate. There's multiple ways to do this. You can turn on angle snaps if you want to snap it that way. If you just start to rotate it, you'll see the angle down here, but if you right click on select and rotate, you can punch in 90 on the z-axis. So we're going -90, and in the front view it looks like it disappeared, but if you hit P, go back to perspective, and then you can rotate around. So I'm holding Alt and the middle mouse button to rotate. Now we can line this up. So I'm just going to move this back 2 grid spaces. So I'm also going to move this back 2 grid spaces, and that should give us enough room to model the character's head in the middle. So now I'm going to hit F to go to the front view again. I'm going to take the front view, the concept, and I'm going to move this over. So you want to line this up so that the bridge of his nose is going right down the center of the grid in the viewport. Okay, so at this point you can take your pivot. If you go to hierarchy, effect pivot only, I'm going to right click on select and move, and I'm going to center this in the X axis. So once you've centered the pivot point for the front view, we can just double check again, make sure that the bridge of the nose is lined up with the very center of the grid. This is where you can right click on select and move, and if you need to move the drawing back and forth from here, you can. And you just want to make sure it's right in the center of his eyes, down the bridge of the nose. Okay, so the drawing's not perfectly straight in the front, and we're going to have to compensate for that a little bit. Okay, so we're going to start with this. We'll go back to perspective by hitting P, and I'm going to do the same thing with the side view. So I'm going to take my side view, I'm going to hit L to go to the left view, and again we're going to hit F3 to get out of wireframe, and F4 for edged faces. And we're using the grid to line this up. So if you want to move the pivot point, you can go to Effect Pivot Only. And I'll just move the pivot over this time and keep it centered. And I'm going to turn off Effect Pivot Only and just move the image back. And again, we want to line up. We're focusing on the head right now. So we're modeling the character's head first. So we want to make sure that the head is lined up with the center of the grid in the left view. So again, if you want to zoom in, you can right click on select and move, and you can slide the spinner for Y, and just make sure it's centered right down the middle between the ear and the mouth here. Alright, so I'm going to hit perspective again, so hit P for perspective, and we have our images lined up. One tip that I'll note is when you rotate your view like this, we have default shading in the viewport. So sometimes as you're rotating the view, the image disappears. One way around that is to go into your image or into your material and set the self-illumination to 100. Alright, so this will brighten up the image in the viewport, and then when we zoom around, you can also see the image from the back. And this will just help with the modeling when we're rotating. So I'm going to select both the front and side view at this point, and we want to freeze these, but if we right click and freeze, they're going to show up gray. So I'll hit undo. We're going to right click, go to Object Properties, and we're going to turn off Show Frozen in Gray, and then we'll click OK, and now we can right click and freeze selection. Okay, so now these are frozen, so we can start setting up to model the head in the middle, and we can model without accidentally moving the front and side view. So again, you can access these by going to Layer Explorer, and you can expand concepts, and now you'll see front and side view, so you can freeze and unfreeze them from here. You can select them, and if you unfreeze them, even if they're frozen, if you select them through the layers, you can still move them around. And then if I click off, they're not selectable when they're frozen. Okay, so you can select them through here, and you can move them through here even when they're frozen. Alright, so we're going to move on to the next part of the video where we're actually going to model the head, but we haven't even saved the file yet, so let's go ahead and save the file, and we want to start saving incrementally from this point on. So we're going to save the file, go to File, Save As, and we're going to find our project folder. If you go through history, once you start saving, you can easily find your folders because they're going to be listed normally at the top. And in this case, I can find the concepts folder and then just go up from there. And I'm going to find my models folder. And I'm going to start naming this Bob Head _01. Okay, so _01, I'm going to hit save, and then next time I save the file, I'll go up to File, Save As, and then I'm going to hit the plus. Alright, so if I hit the plus, it's going to save it as 02. So from now on, you can just hit the plus when you go to File, Save As. So when you're modeling characters and any object in general, there's multiple ways to get started. There's two ways specifically that I'm going to talk about. There's box modeling and plane modeling. In this video, we're going to use the box modeling method. The difference between the two is with box modeling, we're going to start with a box, so we'll go ahead and set this up right now. I'm going to create a box, and we'll just click and drag to create the box in the viewport like that. If you hit F to go to the front view, you can move the box up towards the character's head. We'll go into the modify panel, and you can actually make the box 1 by 1 by 1 just to keep it simple. And we're going to want to add segments. We're going to go 4 by 4 by 4. Okay, so we're setting this up because we're going to add a spherify modifier that's going to turn this box into a sphere and give us a basic head shape that we can start with. And I'll go into more details about that in a minute. I'm going to right click on select and move and just center this box in the X and Y. Okay, so we'll come back to the box in a minute. Just off to the side in the front view, if we were going to do this using the plane modeling method, I'll do a quick demonstration here. If we create a plane, you have the option in the modify panel to add as many segments as you want. If I convert the plane to editable poly, typically what would happen, we'll take this plane, we'll right click on select and move, and we'll center it in the X and Y. I'll just move it up above to do a quick demo. And if I go into perspective, I'm going to hit F4 to make sure edges are showing in perspective. With the plane modeling method, we would be taking edges and extruding them around between our views. So to do that, you would hold shift and pull a new edge out. Alright, so you can do this along X and Y. If I hold shift and I just keep pulling edges around, this is one method for creating an object. Alright. So like anything, I could use the symmetry modifier, or I could cut this in half and mirror one side, which is what we're going to do with the box. So if I was to go back to my front view, I could delete this half of the model. I can take this and I can go up to mirror an instance, where I would freeze the instanced half, and then as I'm working on this side, the other side is going to update along with it. Okay, so this is one method for modeling. This is the plane modeling method. This is not the method we're going to use for the Bob character, but if anyone wanted to explore this method, they certainly could. I'll probably do a separate video using this method for other objects. So for now, I'm going to unfreeze. So I'm going to note this as well. If I click unfreeze all to delete that object, it's going to unfreeze my image planes in the background here, the concepts. So I'm going to go into Layer Explorer, and it's best to freeze and unfreeze things from here instead. So I'll just quickly freeze the front and side view again. Also note that the box that we're going to model from has been dropped into the concept folder. Okay, so from here I'm going to go back to the box. This is what we're going to use to model from. We can name this Bob Head, and we can start setting up a new layer for the model. So I'm going to click on Layer Explorer. I have the head model selected. I'm going to create a new layer, and we're going to call this Bob Model. I'll keep all the parts of the Bob character that I model in this layer right here. So I can hide and I can freeze and all that stuff. Okay, so we'll make a couple changes to this box. Again, double check, make sure it's centered in X and Y. I'm going to change the color. So I'll just go to color here. You can change the color here, but I also want to change the color of the edges being displayed. So if I change this to blue or whatever color, you can see it's hard to see the edges here. So what I'm going to do instead is I'll hit M. I'll create a default material, and we'll just call this Bob Modeling. It's a good idea to name everything. And I'm going to throw this on to the model. You can change the color here. So if you want to lighten it up a bit or change it completely. Now you'll notice that the edges are blue, so if I click on this, if you change your edge color here, or if you change this color, it affects the edges on the model now. So I'm going to set them to black, click OK. Now if I deselect, the edges are black, so it looks nicer and it's just easier to see the edges as I'm modeling. Anytime the model's selected, the edges will still be white, but when we click off, we can have a look from the views like this. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do with this model is we're going to go to the Modify panel and we're going to add the Spherify modifier. So I'm going to explain what this modifier is doing and why we're doing it this way in a minute. If you made it through the ball character last semester, you would have used this once already at least. But if we add Spherify in the modifier stack, it takes that box and it creates a sphere. So if I go to the Modify panel and turn that off, this is why we added 4, 4, and 4 segments here, so that when we add the Spherify modifier, it's going to take the edges of the box and wrap it around that sphere shape, giving us quads. Okay, so I have a separate video explaining why we're modeling in quads and the importance of quad modeling for subdivision, because we are going to end up subdividing this model after as well, using open subdivision or turbo smooth. Okay, so just if you turn off Spherify, go back to the box, you can take away some of the edges just to see what will happen. So if you set that to 2, 2, and 2 and go back to Spherify, this is what it looks like. Okay, you can keep Spherify on and you can go down to the box, make sure Show End Result is turned on, and then you'll see the modifiers on top of the box. And you'll see what happens if you change the edges individually. Okay, so this is useful in many different ways to do the box modeling technique. So we're going to set these to 4, 4, and 4 to create a perfect sphere. And from here, we'll just right click and convert this to editable poly, and then we'll set this up to start modeling after. So I just want to quickly create a sphere on the side here and explain why we're not using a sphere to model the character's head. Okay, so the main reason is the edge flow. So you're going to hear me mention the importance of edge flow many times when we're modeling. And again, we want to make sure that when we're modeling our character, we are modeling with quads, so 4-sided polygons only. Okay, so anything more than 4-side is going to be known as an n-gon, so it's just n stands for any number other than 4. And then under a quad, you're going to have triangles. So each quad could be split in half to create a triangle. If I added edges in here connected to the edges of the quad, it's going to create an n-gon. When we subdivide a model that's been modeled with quads, it's going to subdivide nice and smooth. If we have triangles or n-gons in here, it's going to create pinching and unwanted smoothing on the model. If you have a look at the sphere, you can see it's mostly quads in here, and we could go in and we could even drag the segments down just to make it more low poly to start. The big problem is the top and bottom, where all the edges come to a point. Okay, so this is creating a pole on the top and bottom, and it's creating triangles all the way around. And when we subdivide and even when we unwrap later, this is going to create problems in the mesh. Alright, so this is why we're not using a sphere, and we're just spherifying a box. So hopefully that clarifies why we're using this method. I'm going to hit F to go to the front view. I'm going to take half of the box, or half of the head model, and we'll delete it. And you can go ahead and move this up if you want. Keep it in the middle. I'm just moving it straight up and down. Just going to kind of line this up so that the center edge is close to the bridge of the nose. And then from here, you can keep this half selected. We're going to go up to mirror. We're going to mirror an instance. Okay, so I've got instance turned on. Click OK, and then you can take this half, just right click and freeze selection. So now we're only going to model half of the model at a time. And now if I move vertices, both sides will update at the same time. Okay, so you should have everything set up to this point. I'm going to go ahead and save the file. And then we'll start blocking in the shape of the model from here. So what we want to do now is we want to start blocking in the shape of the head for the character. And I'm going to be working on this half here. The other half is frozen. And if you select this half, you can hit Alt X, which is the shortcut for see-through mode. And then we can see through to the drawing behind it. And we'll just start by blocking in the front view, and then we'll switch to the left view and we'll start getting the side profile for the face. So I'm going to be working in vertex mode, and I want to just start grabbing vertices and pulling them down. Okay, so Bob has kind of a strange shape to his head, and we're going to pull these vertices down towards the bottom of his neck, and then I'm going to take the top half and we're going to ignore the center edge here. So we're just grabbing the top half of the verts and we'll pull them up towards the top of his head. And we're just going to model through the hairline. So we're looking at the outside of the character's face and just ignoring the hair for now. The hair will be modeled as a separate object later. Okay, so we've kind of got this sorted out here. You can grab some of the verts if you want. Okay, so you want to completely ignore the verts in the center for now. If I move these, it's going to change or create holes between the frozen half. So I'm just going to take the verts here and just kind of push these in and just get them lined up close to the outside edge of the character's face. So another technique is to use the scale tool. You can scale the verts together and you can push them in like this. Okay, so the bottom half of the neck, we're actually going to take most of this and scale it flat. So you can grab all the verts at the bottom. You can use your scale tool again and we'll scale straight down on the Y axis. You can just keep dragging your mouse down and it'll go right from the top of the screen through the bottom, and that will completely flatten that out. And if you want, you can hit P to go to perspective and just quickly look underneath here. Okay, so we haven't adjusted the side yet, but looking underneath here, we don't need these polygons at the bottom. We're going to end up modeling the neck so that the bottom is open. So you can go ahead and take these polygons, just hold Control and select the polygons. A quick way to select is to turn on by angle and turn on ignore back facing. So if I set the angle down to something low like 5 degrees, you can click on one polygon and it picks up everything within a 5-degree angle of that polygon, and then you can hit delete. Alright, I'm going to turn those back off. I'll go back to the front view and I'll just keep pushing these verts in. Just remember to not select the center one, because if I grab them and scale, it's going to pull them away from the middle. So just grab the other verts beside there and you can scale, shift them over, and just try to follow the outside edge. Okay, you can do the same thing at the top. We're just going to quickly block this in the front view and then we'll switch to the side view. Okay, so we've got something like this for now. We're going to end up fixing and straightening out these edges later. But from here, I'll just jump to the left view. So I'm going to hit L. And right now we can't see through because the other half of the model is blocking the view. So I'm going to open up Layer Explorer. And you can go in and you'll see Bob Head 01. That's the other half. And we'll just hide that for now. And then I'll close this. Now in the left view, we're going to start lining the outside edges up with the character's head here. So here it's safe to grab all the verts, and we're just scaling directly back on the X axis, and you can shift this back and forth, and just make sure that your outside edges follow the contour of the character's face. We're going to end up extruding the nose, so we're going to model through the nose for now, and then at the bottom we'll scale these in. So the bottom, with Bob's head, he has a weird curve to his neck that we're going to have to compensate for. So I'm going to take all my edges across here. So you can turn on edge, click and drag to select all the edges like this. And we're going to use the connect tool, but we're going to use connect settings. So you can click settings, and we're going to use slide, and we're going to slide that edge down towards the bottom like this. And then I'm going to click OK. And while that edge is selected, you can move the entire edge back and forth. And we'll just pull this one over here for now and try to line it up between the outside edges of the neck. And then you can grab all the verts on the bottom, and we'll pull these back as well. And we're going to rotate. So you can select rotate from up here, or you can start using your keyboard shortcuts to speed up your modeling. So W is the shortcut for select and move. E is the shortcut for rotate. R is the shortcut for scale. So if I hit E, it's going to switch to rotate. For the sake of the video, I'll just click on the icons up here so you can clearly see what I'm using. So I'm going to rotate this like that. I'm actually going to hit undo. I'm going to use the scale tool and just scale this in smaller before I rotate it, and then I'll rotate this around. Okay, so I'm rotating this around and trying to match the width of his neck at the base of the shirt. And you can pull this through the shirt. Towards the end, we're going to expand this and we'll model a bit of a chest plate. But ultimately, the way the character is designed with his shirt here, we're going to model the head as a completely separate object. Then we're going to model the body as a separate object, the legs or pants separately, the hands separately, and then the feet separately. And one of the advantages to doing all these parts separately is, especially with the hands, you can kit bash or reuse these later on a different model. Okay, so once you've modeled something once, you can save it out and use it multiple times with different characters. In the end, all the models are going to be skinned to the same rig. So each piece will have a skin modifier, and it will be attached to the same rig using the skin modifier. Alright, so we'll continue with this. Just going to rotate and shift things around. At this point, you can probably see where we're going with this. When I'm scaling right now, I'm just scaling in the X and Y. If I scale the whole thing using offset, we'll just scale this down and then jump to the front view. You'll notice that it's scaling it in X, Y, and Z. So in the front view, it's scaling Z and it's pulling it away from the center. So this is why I'm not doing that in the left view. Okay, so I want to quickly cut in a few more edges just to kind of line things up here and get the rest of the head flowing in the right direction. So I'll go ahead and cut an edge across the side. At this point, the grid might be getting in your way. You can hit G on the keyboard and hide the grid. So G is the shortcut to hide the grid. Now with all the edges across the side of the face selected, I'm going to use connect settings again. And this time I'll slide this down. And what you actually want to do is we want to create edges around the head where we can extrude the ears, the mouth, and the nose from. So I'm going to look at where I can place these edges across the side of the face here. So I see where I can connect from the top of the ear to the nose. So I'm going to put one there. You can hit the plus, or you can hit the checkbox to click OK. I'm going to click and drag across the edges underneath there, and I'm going to hit connect, and I'm going to drag this edge up and line this up around the bottom of the ear and the mouth, and then I'm going to click OK. So a quick way to grab an entire edge loop is if you click on an edge, you can double click. That selects the whole edge loop, and then you can move the edge over I'll double click this edge loop and do the same thing, and we're just shaping the side of the face. You can grab the edge and you can rotate it. Okay, so you can either select the edge loop or the verts, it doesn't matter which way you do it, and we can shift everything around. And again, if you want to push this out a bit, you can scale it along the y-axis, and same thing with this section here. So later we might end up moving some of these edges around. I'm probably going to cut another edge through the middle here to open the mouth later. So I might rotate this down a bit and have it so that the corner of the ear kind of angles down towards the bottom of the lip. And then again, I can move this around, so you can move it straight up and down, move it over in the X, or move it between Y and X and just line things up. Okay, so if we move up here, again, I'm just going to make sure this is lined up with the nose. There are going to be some issues where our drawings don't quite line up. So in the left view, everything looks like it's lining up nicely, but if I hit F to go to the front view, you can see where the drawing's off a little bit. I'm not quite at the bottom of the nose here. So you'll have to make a decision on which drawing you're going to stick to as far as lining up your edges. And in this case, I'm going to go with the left view. Okay, so on the front view, I'll be able to line up the bridge of the nose and cut in the eyes, but in the left view, I'm going to be lining up all of the main edges I'm cutting in. So this is also why it's important in your design class to make sure that your front and side view are as accurate as possible. Alright, so moving up towards the top here, I have an edge going across the eye, and we can actually use that edge. So I'll select all the verts. We'll move this down towards the bottom of the eye, and you can rotate this up a bit and angle it towards the nose. I'm going to take all the verts on the top and we'll scale them in on the x-axis, and you can even flatten these out a bit, just scale them in the y. And we want to move these up and just rotate them back a bit to compensate for the angle of his forehead. Okay, so we're going to get something like this. You can flatten this out a bit more if you need to. Just scale everything in. And then get it pushed up here towards the top. So I'm going to cut another edge across the top of the face here. And I'm going to connect and slide this one down towards the top of the eye. I'll click OK, and you'll notice that the edge loop here is kind of crooked because it's taking on the angle of this edge loop up here at the top. So you can turn on the scale tool. If I scale this flat up and down, that's fine. In some cases, you can switch from view to local, and you can scale along the local axis as well. Okay, so for this case, we're just going to keep it in the view. We'll keep everything flat according to the left view, and then I'll just rotate it back again. And then this gives us an edge loop towards the top of the eye that we can work with after. Okay, so if you've gotten to this point, you'll just want to go through and make sure, pay close attention to the outer edge. You can see where right now the head is kind of dipping in and out. So you want to make sure that your edges are scaled out enough that you're creating a nice smooth edge along the front and back edges of your drawing. So if you take your time and try to make things as accurate as possible in the beginning, you're going to have less trouble with it later. So down here, I'll definitely need a few more edges to smooth out the neck. So another way to grab an edge ring is to select an edge and just hit ring. And then you can hit connect settings again. We'll drop one in the middle here. I'm going to scale it in a bit, and then I'll move it across towards the front. And I'm just looking at the angle of the edges here. So I'm trying to keep that as smooth as possible. I'll do one more down here for now, and then we'll save the file again. Okay, so I'll keep that right in the middle, and I'll just shift this a bit. Just want to make sure that this one here lines up with the edge of the nose a bit better. Maybe shift it back a bit. Alright, so if we go to perspective, if you want, you can hit Alt X and just kind of see the shape that we've blocked in so far. We'll definitely want to adjust this in the front view again, but also you can unhide your hidden half and just have a quick look to see what things are looking like so far. So obviously we're going to want to adjust some verts here and spread these edges out, but we've quickly blocked in the overall shape of the head. We just have to make some minor adjustments. Okay, so I'm going to hide the other half again, and we'll go ahead and we'll hit save, and then we'll start looking at adjusting some of the verts and just blocking in features like the nose, ears, the eyes, and the mouth. Okay, so let's start by focusing on the nose. I'm going to hit L to go back to the left view, and we want to start extruding the nose from the base here. So what we can do is we can actually go into perspective, and for now let's just start by grabbing this polygon here, and if you hit F you can go to the front view and you can see how high up the nose, the bridge of the nose actually goes here. And if we go to the left view again, you can see it's actually up here quite a bit. You can grab these verts and we'll just kind of start shifting the verts up a bit, and we're going to extrude our nose from the front there. So I'll go back to perspective, and we're going to grab this polygon on the front here, and then while it's selected you can go back to your left view and we'll just use extrude settings, and we're going to push this out. Just use your slider and we'll push it out something like this. We're just eyeing it up for now. I'm going to click OK, and then we're going to grab the verts on the bottom and we'll pull them out towards the end of the nose here, and we're going to grab the verts on the top and we'll push them back to the middle of the bridge of the nose. So there's a little bit of an arc in here that we can create just by pushing these back here. So I'm going to need to run some more edge loops around the nose, but if we go back to perspective, you can see where things are kind of shifted off from the center. And if I go to the front view, I just want to make sure to pull these verts back to the center like this. Okay, so the reason they were off like that is because we extruded the polygons out. And if you hit Alt X and go back to perspective, you'll notice that it also creates a face on this open side from where we extruded. So you want to take that face and you need to make sure you delete that face on the inside, because later on we're going to take the two halves, we're going to convert them to editable poly again, we're going to attach them and weld all the verts down the middle. If you have a polygon in the middle like this, you won't be able to weld the verts for the two halves. Okay, so just in the front view you can hit Alt X again, put it back in see-through mode, and at this point if you want you can grab verts individually and just start pulling them towards the center for the bridge of the nose, and just try to line this stuff up. Okay, so again, if you look at the front view, you can see the nose is slightly off compared to the side view, and I'm going to be using the side view as my reference for the size of the nose. Okay, so you're going to jump between the front and the side view, and we're going to start shifting things around here. And if you hit P, you can go to perspective, Okay, so right now we're just at the blocking in stage. So we have the nose extruded. We're gonna have to make some changes to the edges after, but we're gonna leave the nose blocked in like that for now, and we're gonna focus on blocking in the hole for the eye, extruding the ear, and then cutting in part of the mouth. So if you go back to your left view, so up here we have this band of quads or polygons, and I'm going to need to extrude an eye back from here. So I'm going to go ahead and select a ring of edges through here, and I'm going to connect one edge loop right through the middle. So I'll make sure slide is set to 0, and I'm going to click OK. And if we jump to the front view, again, this is where you can see that the eyes are off from the drawing. So I'm going to kind of go between the drawing from the front and the side, and just working in the front view for now, you can kind of start shifting some of these edges over by selecting the verts. Just make sure that the outside edge lines up with the drawing. Okay, so I'm grabbing groups of verts here close to the edge and just pulling them back in. And just trying to make sure we keep the overall shape as close to the drawing as possible. So we're almost tracing the edges of the drawing here. Alright, so what I'm looking at here, I want to shift some of these edges over still. One thing you'll note is that if you start pulling the edges around like this in one view, it might start to distort the mesh, and you won't notice it until you go to rotate around. So one way you can avoid that happening, just hit Alt-X here, is you can select your vertex, and if you go under Edit Geometry, you can use Constraints. So if you turn on Edge Constraint, you can slide that vertex along the edge without distorting the overall shape of the edge. So at this point, I'm going to start doing that. So I'll go back to the front view, hit Alt-X. I'm going to start pushing some of these verts towards the middle, and just trying to fix the overall flow of the edges. So if I just double click this edge loop, you just want to look at the shape of your edges. So this is an organic model. We want to make sure that our edges are flowing in a nice curve around the model. If we have edges that are kind of poking in and out like this on an angle, it's going to create a distorted surface on the mesh. So you want to try to make sure you're keeping everything nice and smooth as it wraps around the model. Alright, so what I'm looking at here is I want to extrude the eye around these 4 polygons here. Alright, so I'm gonna end up insetting and extruding this back and creating an oval area for the eye. And before I do that, I want to try to center these verts as much as possible. So I'm gonna pull these verts around a little bit and try to make this area square to begin with, and try to keep it as even as possible. So at this point I'm kind of ignoring the drawing back here, and I'm just focused on squaring up these quads here. So what I want to do is I want to take these 4 polygons here, so 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to use Inset, and you can inset just a small amount like this. If you're having trouble controlling this slider, if you hold Alt, it'll actually slide in smaller increments so you can be more precise. So you can hold Alt and left mouse button to drag, and be more precise. And I'm just going to bring this in a little bit for now. Click OK, and then we want to grab our 4 corner vertices around these 4 quads, and you're going to use the scale tool and scale these in. Okay, so this is going to start to create a round shape that we can push and pull the verts around after. Okay, so again, we're just blocking things in right now. I'm going to start grabbing the verts at the top here and pushing them up to create more of a curve under the bottom of the eye, and even here on the outside, and even right here on this side here. If I hit Alt X, you can see that a bit better. Okay, so I'm going to talk about edge loops wrapping around the eyes and the mouth shortly as well. So for now, we just want to get to this point here. You can take these polygons here, and we can actually delete those, and it'll leave you with a hole. So this hole can be selected either as an edge loop or as a border. Okay, so we're going to select it as an edge loop, and if you go to your left view, you can see how it's on an angle like this. So we can take this from the left view and kind of scale it flat. Okay, so we're not going to scale it all the way. We'll keep it on a bit of an angle so that it wraps around the curve of the head. But then you can hold shift, and just like I was showing with the plane modeling example at the very beginning, if you hold shift, you can drag back to extrude the edges from there. Okay, so what we're going to be doing now is creating the eye socket. Okay, so again, we're just blocking things in for now. I'm going to come back to this later, and we'll add in more edges. I just want to start blocking in the ear and the mouth. Once I have everything blocked into this stage, we'll come back and start adding in the extra edge loops that we need, and I'll explain why we're putting them in there. So don't forget to keep saving your work. I'm going to hit Save As and hit the plus. Okay, so now I'm on version 5. So I have lots of versions of this file backed up already. And we're going to go to our left view, and let's start having a look at the ear. So I'm going to hit Alt X, and you can see our ear is down here. And I want to do kind of the same thing with the eye, where I'm going to grab some polygons and extrude out this time. But I want to inset the ear just to create a base of like an edge loop around the base of the ear. So I'm going to be looking at grabbing these polygons right here. You can hit P to go to perspective and just see which polygons you've selected. And I can see just by looking from here that this might be okay for the ear. If I go back to the left view, I'm going to hit Inset, but I'm going to use Inset Settings and just push this in a bit. And then click OK. And I'll slide the edge towards this side back towards the middle a bit, just to keep this nice and square. And again, you can turn on edge constraints under Edit Geometry if you want to make sure to just push this or slide it along the existing edges. You can grab your verts, try to keep things as straight as possible, and I'll pull these ones back a bit. Might lift this one up and just try to follow as close to the base of the ear as you can. Okay, we can always come back and fix this after. And I'm going to grab these 2 polygons right here. I'm going to hit P to go to perspective, and I'll hit Alt X this time so you can see the mesh a bit better, so it's not in see-through mode. And I'm going to use extrude settings again and just push this out. Okay, so you can push this out something like this, just eye it up for now. Click OK, and if you go to the front view, you'll see how our front and left views don't quite line up. So I can always hit the grow tool, and before I do, I'll hit perspective again. You can see I have the 2 polygons on the end selected. If I hit grow, it'll grow that back to the base, and I might just shift this down a bit. If I try to move it now, it's going to kind of destroy the mesh. So I'm going to hit undo twice. And that's because I have edge constraints turned on still. So I have to switch that back to none. And then I'll just shift this down. So I'm kind of going between the two drawings right now because they don't quite line up. So we're going to eye the ear up a bit. So from the front view, you can grab your verts at the end and just kind of pull them out towards the end of the ear. So the ear has this pear shape. So we're going to need to cut another edge loop through the middle here. So you can grab all the edges like this or hit ring. We'll use connect settings and we'll drop an edge loop right in the middle and click OK. With that edge loop selected, you can just scale that out and we'll get it looking something like that. And if you go to perspective, we can see how we have this blocked in so far. And if you look at this kind of from the top down, you can see where our edge loops are not really straight running through the middle. So if I grab that edge loop, you can switch it to local and you can try scaling it this way to flatten it out. But I'm going to stick with view because that's not quite working out the way I want it to. And I'll grab the vert on the top middle and the vert on the bottom middle. And you can turn on edge constraints again and just slide those back a bit and try to keep it straight like this. Okay, so I might grab this back edge and pull it forward. I'm just trying to keep my edge loops as straight as possible. It just makes it easier to cut in the extra edge loops and geometry that I'm going to need later. Alright, so we're going to need to add more to this. We need to reshape this. I need to cut in a section for the mouth, and I can actually utilize another edge loop right through the middle here for the mouth and also to help with the overall shape of this ear. So I'm going to grab this edge here and hit ring, and I'll connect another edge loop right through the middle. I'm going to click OK. So this is where I'm talking about the edges kind of jutting up and down. So I want that edge loop to be as smooth as possible, wrapping around the model. And so I'm going to grab this vertex here. I've got edge constraints on. I'm just going to start shifting this down and try to keep this as a nice smooth curve wrapping around the model. So same back here. So I'm just going to start pushing the verts around a bit. I want to keep that one in the middle. Just try to keep your edges nice and smooth. Okay, so once we start to subdivide the model, you're going to see why we want to keep things as straight as possible. And then sections like this around the base of the ear. Okay, so just like we did with the eye, where I kind of pulled these bottom verts out to make it a little rounder, we're going to do that with the ear here as well. So you can pull that one out from the bottom. We want this whole edge loop here. Okay, so if I highlight these edges, we want this to wrap around the ear, forming more of a round, smooth curve, not so much of a box shape. So I'm going to grab this top edge here and just kind of pull that up. You can pull these ones out a little bit. We're just fanning these verts out a bit. Alright, so that ear's blocked in. We're going to come back to the ear just like we will with the nose and the eyes. We're going to add a subdivision modifier soon, and you'll see where we really need to start pushing and pulling the verts around. I just want to do one more thing before we get to that point, and that's just going to be to open the mouth. So if I hit F, you can see the mouth in the drawing is down lower. If I go to L, or the left view, it's the same thing. I need to drop this down a bit. I'm going to keep my edge constraints on. I'll grab all these verts here and just kind of shift them down like that. Okay, this one back by the ear, I'll shift this down, and again, take note of the shape of your edge loop. Try to keep it as smooth as possible. Alright, so in the front view, you can see where we're going to start splitting the mouth open. You can actually grab these two edges right here. Okay, so the first two edges on the front, and if you want, you can go into perspective. Just hit P, and I'm going to chamfer this part of the mouth open. So these two edges selected, you're going to go into Edit Edges, open up the chamfer tool, hit chamfer settings, and you're going to see a lot of options here for chamfer. And if we just kind of go down through here, we're not going to change the top, it's set to uniform. Edge amount, if you move this up and down, it's going to spread the chamfer open. And again, you can hold Alt and you can slow that spinner down a bit and be more precise. So we just want to open it a little bit, something like this. You can add chamfer edges, which we don't want to do. There's things like edge depth, bias, radial bias. These things we don't need to mess with for this type of chamfer. What we want to do is open the chamfer up. So down here you're going to click open, and that's going to create an open hole here. So I'm going to click OK. And at this point we have the mouth blocked in, the ear blocked in, the nose and the eyes. One thing I'll point out right away is we have an N-gon sitting right here and right here. Alright, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 polygons. So we're going to have to clean this up. But before we get into that, we're going to cut in extra edge loops and see where we can connect things up. At this stage, it might be a good time to add the open subdivision modifier. So we're going to go up to our modifier list. We're going to go down and find open subdivision. If you start scrolling through, you can hit O, it'll jump to the O's. We're going to use open subdivision, and we're going to set the iterations to 2. So we're subdividing this mesh twice. And if I turn off isoline display, you can see what it's doing here. So I'm going to set the iterations back to 0, and we'll just focus on one quad here. So if you look at this quad, each time I increase the iterations of subdivision by 1, it takes the quad and it divides it into 4 new quads. So if I hit that again, it's going to take all the quads, divide them into 4 new quads. And just to highlight that even better, if I select the polygon that I'm looking at, this one here, go back to open subdivision, it's still highlighted. And if I increase iterations by 1, you can see it took that quad and divided it into 4 new ones. If I do that again, it makes more quads from each quad. So what it's doing is it's smoothing the overall surface, and this is why our edge loops from here on in will be extremely important, because the edges we place now are going to control the way the surface of the model is smoothing out. And even in more depth, I'm going to talk about the edge loops wrapping around the eye and the mouth and how important it is to wrap those in so that they can deform properly for animation. Alright, so at this point we're going to save the file again, and then we're going to move on to detailing these parts that we've blocked in. Alright, so let's start detailing the eyes. So before we cut in edge loops, and I'll explain the edge loops, we'll use some reference for that. Let's just have a look around at the eye. First of all, you'll notice that it's a little bit deformed, so we're going to fix that. At this point we're almost sculpting and reshaping things by pushing and pulling the verts around. And if you turn on show end result over here, you can always have a look at it with open subdivision turned on. And again, F4 turns off the edges and then turns them back on. We're going to be toggling this on and off a lot now to make sure that everything is lining up and smoothing the way we expect it to. Alright, so first of all, again, if we jump to the front view, I'm going to hit Alt X and put the model in see-through. So you can see the eye is way below where we've modeled it in the front view, and if we go to the left view, we're pretty close. So I might stretch this out a bit, pull the bottom down. Ultimately, I'm going to go into perspective later. I'm going to set up eyeballs for the character, and we're going to fix it in perspective view. So right now we just want to get it as close as we can. And one thing we can do is, if you select a polygon, you can hold shift and select the polygon beside it to grab a whole loop. And we can hit grow to grow this out a bit, and we'll just try scaling from here. If you have constraints turned on, turn them off, set it to none. And I'm just going to stretch this out a bit. So we're making the eye more oval, and we're going to leave it like that for now. I'm going to turn off polygon, and we can go ahead and start just kind of pulling edges out before we cut in too many extra edges. Once we put in our edge loops, it'll be a little more difficult to select the edges and pull things around. So we can do a bit of a cleanup quickly before we do that. And if you're looking from the front, try to make sure that your middle edge loop, so here and here, are going right through the middle of the eye, and same thing with this one here. Okay, so sideways we're pretty good. Top and bottom, especially the bottom, I'm going to shift that over just a little bit. So just minor tweaks to try to line things up. And then I'll shift this vert over as well. And then looking from an angle, I'm going to start pulling edges out a bit, because remember in the beginning we inset this and then we kind of scaled this open border. So it's not going to conform perfectly to the face. We're going to have to do some manual tweaking. So I'm just looking around the model like this and pulling edges out to try and tweak this a bit. So we're just trying to do as much as we can now. We can always fix this later, but I want to try to do it now while we have simple geometry to select and work with. Okay, so we'll call that good for now. I'm going to cut in extra edge loops, and I'm going to do the same thing for the mouth, but before I do, let's go back to our folder here. Alright, so I'm going to back out here, and you'll notice I've added a reference folder. So any reference images I'm using, I'm putting in here now. And if we go in here, I have edge loops, which you guys can get from Canvas. And if you go through here, you can look through these, and I'll actually jump right to the Bob one here. Okay, so this is actually an old version of Bob, but if I look at this close, you can see how I've wrapped edge loops around the original Bob character. And on the old Bob character, the eye sockets are closed in at the back, but we're going to model them open, and it's going to give us more freedom to animate the eye sockets. So in this one here, I've highlighted the edge loops, especially around the mouth and the eyes. And if we just go through some of the images in the folder, you'll see how people model the edge loops to wrap around the mouth, and they kind of join up at the nose here. And same thing with the eyes. This model, you might notice some triangles on here, so we're going to ignore that part. Right here you'll see another example with nice loops around the mouth and loops around the eyes. If you look at the muscle structure in the face, especially on this side here, you'll notice that how the muscles, the bands wrap around the eye, and the same thing with the mouth. We're almost emulating the muscles in the mouth and the face, or the eyes. So obviously on a more advanced character, you could emulate more of the muscles around the face, but we're just concerned about the mouth and the eyes for this cartoon style character. Alright, so jumping back in here, we're going to add another edge loop through the outside of the eye. So you can select an edge, hit ring, and connect settings. You can slide these in and out, just slide it fairly close to the edge of the eye socket. And we'll double click the inside edge at the back. We're going to actually pull that back a bit further. Okay, so this is good enough. We're going to need a supporting edge loop on the inside. So we're going to need one in the middle. So if I hit ring and connect, we have one right in the middle. We'll set slide to 0. This is what I call the supporting edge loop in the middle of the eye socket. And this one we can scale out a bit. Okay, so I'm scaling in X, Y, and Z. And if you turn on show on result, you can continue to scale this with that on, but you'll see how this is just going to act as a supporting edge loop so that when the character closes their eyes, this edge loop will keep the inside from collapsing over the sphere that we're going to use for the eyeball. Okay, so we're going to put another edge loop on this side. I'm going to hit ring, connect. This one will slide closer to the front, and I'll click OK. And there's a bit of a slope in here because we scaled the inside edge loop, so I'm going to scale this one back out a bit just to try to keep the surface even. And this is going to be the inside of our eyelid. Okay, so just as an example, if I was to grab these polygons down here and I pull them up, because this is what we're going to do with our morph targets later when we're creating eye blanks, you'll see that now if I turn on show on result, it looks like the character is starting to close the bottom eyelid, and inside is staying open because of our supporting edge loop. Alright, so this is the minimum amount of edge loops we want on the character, and this is all we're going to use for Bob. We could put extra edge loops in here if you wanted to make eyelids or eyelashes and stuff like that. You can definitely add more detail. Same for the lips, but we're going to keep it simple for Bob. Alright, so that's all we need for now. We'll come back to the eyes later once we've made the actual eyeball, because we're going to have to conform this around the eyeball to make sure it blinks properly. Okay, so now let's add the edge loops around the mouth. So we basically want to do the same thing we did with the eye. We're keeping the mouth simple, so we just want to have a few nice edge loops running around here where we can make our mouth shapes later on with the morph targets. Okay, so again, we have n-gons here. We're going to try to clean that up. I'm going to turn on edge constraint for a minute, and I'm going to start pushing a few of these verts back. Okay, so I'm just grabbing the verts here with edge constraints turned on and giving myself more space to work with on the corner of the mouth. Okay, so I'll probably end up pushing some of this stuff around. I'm going to start pulling verts down like this. And what I'm doing is I'm starting to look at the flow of this outer edge here. Okay, so this is going to be the outside of the mouth. So I'm just trying to kind of push these in and down and create kind of an outer edge loop that wraps up under the nose like this. So I'm going to work in between this outer edge loop here and the mouth that's cut open. And if you want to go to the left view, you can select a couple verts down here. Go to the left view, and you'll see where Bob's lip kind of juts out a bit here. So just make sure your verts kind of wrap down and line up roughly around there. And we're going to fix some of this after. Okay, so if you can spread them out like that, then we can actually quickly clean this up with the edge loops in this case. So I'm going to select an edge here. If you hit ring, you'll notice it stops here because of the n-gon. So you can hold control to add this edge here, hold control to add that one, and continue with ring. And we're going to cut our first edge loop right through the middle there. Okay, so we have an edge loop right through here. We'll make it centered, and then I'm going to click OK. And then we still have n-gons here that we need to get rid of. And one way we can do this is just by cutting another edge from the vertice up at the corner right through these to the middle here. And we could actually use the extra vertices on the corner of the mouth to improve the overall mouth shapes later. So quick and easy way to do this is to grab two edges like this. You can hit connect them right in the middle, and then all you have to do is select this vert here, hold Control and select the vert you're connecting to, and then you hit Control Shift E. Alright, so that's the big shortcut for connecting vertices. So I'm going to select these two right here, these two edges. I'm going to hit connect. Anytime you hit the button, it's just going to automatically use the previous settings. And then I'm just going to connect from here to here, the vertices, with Control Shift E. Alright, so now we've got kind of a spider web of polygons in the corner here. And this is perfect for what we want. So now we can grab these verts here. I'm going to turn off edge constraints this time and just kind of reshape the corner of the mouth. Try to keep the corner of the mouth curved and round like this. Alright, so these edge loops, I'm really going to try to make these as round and smooth as I possibly can. And I don't have edge constraints turned on, so I'm just going to make sure, as I'm looking around here, make sure I'm not pushing verts in and out too much. And just try to visually control the surface here. Okay, so we could actually open the mouth a bit. We'll push these up. And again, keeping this nice and curved around here. So you might want to make a note of what I'm about to say next, because it's important down the road. You want to model your character's mouth open like this. For one, it's easier to model, to get inside and add detail. Later on, when we set up the morph targets, we're going to start by copying this character's head with the mouth open, and then we're going to close the character's mouth on the final character. So your character's mouth position will start closed, but during the modeling process we keep the mouth open because it's easier to work with. Okay, so as we're doing this, we should also be toggling open subdivision on and off. And if I turn off my vertex and hit F4, this is where you can start kind of sculpting and pushing and pulling the verts around. So if you go on an angle, you can see where there might be little divots and imperfections in the mesh. So I can go back down here and I can pull some of this stuff out and try to get rid of those little dimples that I don't want. So you can also turn on show end result, and if you hit F4, you can see the smooth mesh, and you'll see the orange cage of the low poly mesh that we're working on. So you can just kind of pull things out like that, and this is just a great way to work, is by modeling low poly with the open subdivision on top. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I'm in perspective. If you want, this might be a good opportunity to unhide the other half of the mesh just to see how things are looking so far. So I'm going to go up to my layer explorer. I'm going to unhide bobhead 01. That's our instanced half. Just make sure it's still keeping up. So you can see we need to fix the nose and ears, that's no problem. But we've got the eyes and the mouth pretty much blocked in. But while we have our other half sitting there, let's go ahead and grab this edge loop for the mouth. And let's just try extruding this back. Alright, so you could wait and we could finish modeling the ears, the nose, and all the details, and then we could weld these together, and then we could deal with the mouth as one whole piece. But if you just grab what we have now and you try to scale this down, okay, so when we're extruding edges, you're holding shift and dragging like this. So we could extrude those back, which is probably what we're going to do. If you do the same thing with scale, you can hold shift and scale. You can also extrude this way. Okay, so if I wanted this extra edge loop, you can see what's going to happen here. It's pulling away from the middle, so that's where I'd want to attach the two halves, weld it up, and then scale in like that. But for this, we're just going to use select and move, hold shift, and drag back. So you're only dragging back a small amount. We're going to create the inside of the lip this way. Alright, so this is the inside of the lip. This is kind of like the this part of the eyelid here that we left. So we're going to pull back again. This will be our supporting edge loop for when we do our mouth shapes, just like we have a supporting edge loop for the eyelid. And then I'll pull this back one more time, and this is going to be the back of the mouth, which we can also keep open. We could cap this and connect it all up, doesn't matter, but we can also just angle this. So this is as far as we can go right now. The rest we're going to have to tweak once we attach the two halves. So just looking at this from an angle, if I turn on show end result, I can turn off edges, you can hit F4, you're going to see a line down the middle because right now the two halves aren't attached and they're not welded. Once we attach and weld, this line down the middle will disappear. And we can always add more edge loops as we go later on. So you can define the lips better by pushing and pulling these verts out. So one thing I will do is I'll start pushing these verts up a bit here, because again I'm looking at the way the edge loops curve around the mouth. And if you push them up without using edge constraints, have a look at your angles because you might have to pull them out. Alright, so that's the mouth blocked in for now. We'll probably add more detail to the mouth later once it's all attached, but for now that's the mouth edge loops blocked in and detailed as far as we can go while it's in two halves. So next we'll tackle the nose and then we'll finish off the ears. So I'm going to save again and then we can move on. Alright, so for the nose, we can kind of zoom in here and turn on show end result, and you can see how the nose is kind of spreading itself out, where we want to have kind of a hard edge in here. The open subdivision is pushing the polygons too far away, so we're going to need an edge loop around the base of the nose to keep this area tighter. And we also want to pull the corner of the nose where there'd be a nostril. We want to pull that out and maybe sharpen the end. So we're going to need to add some more edge loops here. So I'm going to start by grabbing the corner here and I'm going to pull that over. If you want to turn on edge constraints, then you can do it that way. And I'll pull this over here. If you pull the corner of the nose out like that, I'm going to turn on show end result as I'm doing this. You'll want to adjust the verts underneath as well. So I just want to make sure that all my edges are wrapping nicely around here. So this is where I have an edge loop going through here. So now I've cut in all these extra edges. I'm going to have to select all three edges underneath here to adjust this whole section. And for the mouth, you actually want these edge loops to line up on the top and bottom. So I'm also going to grab these ones here and I'm going to shift those over, because later on it's going to be easier to work with for the morph targets if these edge loops kind of line up with each other. So I'm just going to shift these things around a little bit. At this point you'll constantly be shifting verts around, straightening things up, keeping things organized, and that's just all part of the process. And again, if you move things along the edge constraint like that, you might have to have a look at it from a different angle and pull things back out. So I'm going to go in and turn off my edge constraint and just pull these edges out in the front a little bit. So if you just keep track of things as you're working, you'll have less work to do later. So these edge loops are wrapping around the neck even. You want to really rotate your view around and make sure that these are creating a nice curve. Once we start modeling the body, this is going to be extremely important as well. Okay, so let's get back up to the nose. Let's make sure this is all straight in the middle here. Okay, we'll probably mess around with that later once we attach things. So the base of the nose we've pulled over. Anywhere like this where you've got a vert that's not quite in the middle, just make sure it lines up in the center so that we don't have problems welding the halves together later. So the tip of Bob's nose is kind of curved and pointy, so I'm going to push this over a bit. And I might pull this out towards the end. You can turn on show end result as you're going. So we still need to add in the supporting edge loop here. So let's grab an edge along here and we'll hit ring, and we can connect with connect settings, and we can slide this back towards the base. As you're doing this, you can turn on show end result, and you'll see what happens as you slide that edge back towards the face. Okay, so I don't want it right against the face. I'm going to have this sitting out just like that. Alright, so then we can click OK. We can turn on show end result, and then we can see if we need to pull the corners out or adjust anything from this point. Okay, so the bridge of the nose should be flatter. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these verts here. Just going to pull them in. If you want to go to your left view, you can try to line things up to the drawing closer. Okay, so a lot of small tweaking as we go at this point. Just kind of sculpting, reshaping. And I'll jump back to perspective. I'm going to pull this vert down a bit, pull it in. Okay, so we're going to toggle show end result on, and I want to pull the corner of the nose out a bit still. So we're going to go ahead and grab these two verts and pull them over a bit further. So we've got a lot of open space around the cheek here, and when I turn on show end result, the nose still looks a little bit spread out here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to grab one of the big long edges along the cheek here, and if you hit ring, you'll see how it wraps around the nose and over the top. And we're going to open up connect settings, and we're going to connect an edge through here. If you turn on show end result, you can see how that helps to tighten up the nose. And we can slide this up or down, and you can see how it really flattens out the bottom of the nose if we put that extra edge through this way. Okay, so if I turn off show end result, so we're adding an extra edge close to the bottom here. Okay, so I'm going to place it somewhere close to the bottom like this and click OK, but then we're going to have to go in and pull these edges back up. So if you go to your left view, or just rotate around, you can hold Alt to deselect these edges here. So I'm going to deselect that edge in there, and I'll actually deselect this edge too, and then I'm going to slide these ones back up, and I'll turn on edge constraints to push those up like that. Okay, so I'm going to keep those roughly in the middle here, and then I'm going to go in and adjust the individual verts. And again, I'm trying to make sure my edge loops wrap nicely. So if the character had cheekbones, we could actually pull some of these out a bit. But if I turn on show end result, you can see what's happening as you push these verts around. Alright, so with show end result turned on, I'm going to hit F4. Okay, we've got the nose pretty close at this point. We can play around with the nose later, and we can tweak it further. We're going to move on to the ear next. So I'm going to save again, and then we'll do the ear. So for the ear, we just need to add a few more edge loops in here just to clean this up. So we want that pear shape, but we also have kind of an inset or indent in the ear here that we'll have to deal with. So I'm just going to quickly have a look around and clean up. I'm going to turn off edge constraints, and I want this outer edge loop here just on the ear. I kind of want this to be pulled out a bit so that the ear has a curve rather than flat on top. So I'm going to start pushing some of these out. So out and away. And just kind of fixing the outside edge before I add more edges. And even underneath here, I'll pull that down a bit. And I'll pull this one here up. Alright, so we can add another edge loop right through the end of the ear here to try to maintain this shape at the end of the ear. So I'm going to grab an edge and hit ring, and I'll hit connect and slide this one over. And you could take that and you could try to scale this up a bit, and this will just help with the shape towards the end of the ear. And then if you go back to this one, you can scale it back in a bit. So again, I'm going to turn on show end result, and you're going to see at this point it's kind of has a shape like this, and we need to have more of a hard edge around the base of the ear. So I'm going to grab this edge loop, or this edge on the inside here, and hit ring, and we're going to add a loop. So I'm going to hit connect. You can turn on show end result as you're doing this, and you're going to slide this loop in close to the base of the ear. Okay, so you want it fairly close like that. We can actually add another one on this side. Okay, so don't forget to hit OK when you add that in there. And then I'm going to grab this edge here and hit ring, and we'll connect another one and slide that one back towards the base as well. And again, you can turn on show end result to see how that's tightening things up. And then I'll click OK. And then if you turn on show end result again, you can kind of have a look and see before we do anything else. If you want to make adjustments to the ear at this point, you can. So one quick thing to do would be, if you want to scale it, I'm going to select the polygons at the end, and I'll hit grow. Just grow this out a bit. And this is where you can switch this from view to local and scale this in along the local axis. Okay, so if everything's on an angle, it's not going to stay straight. So you might have to rotate things and shift them back a bit. And if you look at this kind of from the top view, you can see where we could actually grab these front verts all the way down this side and just kind of push those back in a bit and try to keep the end of the ear nice and round. So I'm trying to keep these verts centered and just trying to keep the shape of the ear as round as I possibly can. Okay, so let's see with show end result turned on. I'm going to grab this edge loop that I added in here, and I'm going to shift this back a little bit. And we'll shift this one closer to the middle. And I might scale this one at the end out a bit. So it's good to kind of step back and have a look. If the overall ear seems too big, you can always select the entire ear up to the base and just scale it in a bit. If you scale it in like this, it's going to pull the ear away from the head. So you're going to have to push it back in. And this is again where you can switch to local. And it might be a little easier to push this in. Okay, so that's fairly close. I might just grab the verts at the end here and pull them out. Okay, so pulling verts in the local axis won't work. You'll have to switch this back to view, and then it's best to look on an angle like this. Just to pull these out a bit. Alright, so we can clean this up more later. The other thing I might do is make the back of the ear a bit rounder, so you can grab these verts and pull them out like this. And that'll give the back of the ear a bit of a curve. And then we'll have a look at the front of the ear. I'm going to grab all the faces on the front like this. Okay, so just up to here. And you can use inset. And we'll do an inset like this. And actually, I'm going to hit the X on that. We're going to remove these two. We'll just do it from here. So I can hit inset here. And I'll click OK, and I'm going to push these verts over a bit. So I'm doing this on an angle to make sure I don't pull it out. And then I'll pull these ones down, just kind of rounding this area out. So what we're going to do is take the inset and extrude it back. And then we can come back and push and pull these around. So if you take this part here, you can extrude this back a little bit. And then you want to start looking at this with open subdivision turned on. Okay, so this gives us an indent that we can work with, but we need to change the edge of the ear here. So around the earlobe and this top part of the ear, if you turn off show on result, you can start grabbing the edges on the inside corners and pulling them down and in. And again, you need to make sure you're checking along the front and side at the same time, because if I pull this over in the front view, this ear's on an angle, so I'm gonna have to pull this back as well. So up here, I'll have to pull this edge down, and we'll pull this one from the corner down. And then we'll turn on show and result so you can see what the ear's starting to look like. And towards the bottom here, we don't want this hard edge in here. So what we can do is just take the vertices on the inside where we extruded and just kind of fan them out a bit. So we'll push these up like this, and you can even start to pull them out towards the edge, and that will start to remove that hard edge that we're seeing in there and just kind of blend the curve of the ear together. And you can turn on show and result to see it as you go, and then you can see what we're trying to do here. If you want the top to be deeper or sharper, you can always grab these and pull them back. Grab that one in the middle, make it a little more concave by pulling this back. Okay, so this is good practice even just for modeling in perspective and getting used to angles. So I'm constantly shifting around like this to make sure I'm not distorting the mesh when I pull the verts around. Okay, so it's kind of intricate work, but it's worth it in the end when you have everything set up and all your edges are nice and smooth. Alright, so we could continue to work with the ear and smooth it out further, but at this point we're pretty close with the ear. If I turn off edges, so hit F4, we're pretty close at this point. From here, this would be kind of your last chance to go around and work with this as two separate halves, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to weld the two halves together, and we're going to start to finish off the mouth. We're going to model teeth, we're going to create the eyes, and we're going to do the rest of the parts for the head. And when we weld these two halves together, we can also extend the neck down and make the chest plate that will be underneath the shirt. So from this point on, if you want to go around and just double check and make sure that your verts are as smooth as possible, make sure that your edges are as smooth as possible, then the next step will be to weld these two halves together and continue working on the rest of the head. So we're going to save it from here, and then we'll come back and start adding the rest of the details. Alright, so the next step is we're going to need to weld these two halves together and make one mesh from them. So to do this, we're going to have to go in and delete open subdivision. So just right click and delete open subdivision. That should take it off of both pieces. And we're going to go into our layer manager and we're going to unfreeze the other half. Alright, so right now if you were to try to attach the other half, it won't let you because it's an instance and you can't attach an instance. So we're going to have to take that other half and right click, convert it to editable poly. Now it's a separate object. So now you can take your first half, you can go under edit geometry, click on attach, and then just click the other half, and now they become one piece. So I'm going to turn off attach, and then we'll go to the front view, and the next thing we need to do is weld the verts down the middle. So I'm going to turn on verts, click and drag down the middle. So you want to carefully select only the verts in the middle. If it helps, you can turn on Alt X, and I'm going to click and drag all the way to the bottom, and then I'm just going to zoom in and make sure I've only selected verts along the center seam. And if you want, you can go into perspective and just have a look around the model and make sure everything's selected. Then I'll go back to the front view, and a quick tip is to just use the scale tool and scale the verts together along the y-axis. So you just click and drag and scale along y. Make sure you're in view, not local, when you do that, and it's actually going to be the x-axis in view. So we're going to go straight across the x-axis, scale all these verts together, and then we're going to go into weld, but we're going to go to weld settings. So if you open up weld settings, you can right click on the spinner to set this to 0 and then just tap the up arrow once. So we want the smallest possible increment of weld. This will make sure it only welds verts that are on top of each other. So you can see the number here. Before it was 556, now it's 514. And then you can click OK. And you want to make sure that it didn't weld any verts that are close together like that. But if you did exactly what I just showed you, you shouldn't have an issue. So you can double check. Another way to check is we're going to add open subdivision back on here. And remember, we're using open subdivision with 2 iterations. And then if you look around the mesh, there should be no pinches or holes along the seam. So you'll see where the seam kind of sticks up a bit here, and we can just go around and manually fix that. So we're going to have to go around and do a bit of cleanup on the mesh. There's going to be some verts like this that we want to shift around. And again, you just want to make sure that your edge loops have a nice curve to them. So if you look on an angle like this, you can see where that center edge is kind of sticking out and it's almost pointy. So you want to go around and carefully push some of these verts back. So your edges should wrap around with a nice curve. So it's important to take the time to do this so that when you subdivide the mesh, it doesn't look like you have hard edges where you don't want them. And when you're adjusting the edge on the center seam, you want to make sure that you're only pushing in the Z and Y. You don't want to move this side to side because we want to keep symmetry. Alright, so I'm looking at the front of the mouth here, and there's a couple verts that I would like to push out. Now that we've welded everything together, if you want to make symmetrical changes, you can always select the same vert on either side, and you can use scale, and you can scale the verts apart like this. Okay, so that's one way you could do this. You can add the symmetry modifier, but I'm going to try to avoid the symmetry modifier. The symmetry modifier is fine, but sometimes when you go to weld the seam after, it creates a mess down the middle. So we might have a look at that later. So if I turn on open subdivision, you can have a quick look around and just check the smoothness of the mesh overall so far. Okay, so it's not too bad. There's a couple things we can do now that we've attached to everything. And the first thing is we'll close this gap in the mouth. So you could leave this open, you could angle this down and create what's called a mouth sock. But to keep things really simple, and also for when we paint this later, it'll be easier to just cap the back. I'm going to take that border and I'm going to cap it. So once you cap it, you need to reconnect all the edges going across here and form quads on that back plane. So you can start by clicking on a vert at the top and then the one underneath and hitting Control-Shift-E, and we'll just go through and reconnect all these edges. So I'm also going to connect an edge across here to make sure I have quads on the end polygons. And quick way to do that is to select one edge, hit ring, just connect right through the center, and then you can quickly connect the verts at the end. And then we want to make sure the back of the mouth is concave. So I'm going to take the edges back here and push them back and just reshape the back of the mouth. And I want to keep symmetry going, so I'm going to work on both sides at the same time. That way I don't have to use the symmetry modifier later. can even grab the entire polygon section at the back. So just double check in the left view, make sure you're not pushing this too far back. So if I hit grow, you can actually grow this out, and you can select the entire back area. And if I go to the left view, I'm going to pull this back in like this. And a quick way to kind of clean this up even would be to take those polygons in the left view, scale them flat, and then go in after and push your edges back. So this time I'm starting from a flat surface, so I can pull the middle back and then gradually push these other edges back. So ultimately you want to turn on show end result, and it should look something like this. So one other thing we can do is we can take this inner edge loop, remember this is the supporting edge loop, and just to keep the inside of the mouth open, we can scale this up, and that kind of opens up the inside, and then you can manually push verts and edges around from there. Alright, so if you want to have a tighter lip area, we can still add another edge loop to the outside of the mouth. And just before I do that, I'm going to grab some of these verts, and again, I'm just trying to make this curved area nice and smooth. So it is a lot of tweaking, but again, if you want a nice smooth mesh in the end, this is the part where you have to be patient and just go around and tweak it as much as you can. And the more you do this, the quicker you're going to get at doing this. Alright, so let's add one more edge loop around here. And you could slide this in, and I'm going to pull the upper part of the lip down a bit, and again you can turn on your edge constraints and just shift this down a little bit like that, and that extra loop will just help to keep the shape of the lip. And if you wanted to, you could go in here and pull some of these verts out to shape this lip area. If I go to the left view, you can see what I'm talking about here. So I could kind of start pulling these verts out and kind of create that little puff in the lip. But if I start pulling these verts out, I'm going to have to pull these out a little bit as well, just to keep the curve going. Alright, so the next thing we're going to need is we're going to need to create some teeth for inside the mouth. And once we place the teeth, we can still go in and we can further adjust the lips and just make sure that the mouth works with the teeth once we model them. So I'm going to save this file again, and we'll create the teeth. once we model the teeth and the eyes, then we can adjust the mouth and the eyelid area, or the eye socket, to make sure everything conforms to the teeth and the eyes as well. Alright, so we're going to model the teeth. There's multiple ways you could go about modeling the teeth, but I'm going to show you a quick trick where we're going to use the shapes. Under splines here, we're going to use an arc. So you can click on arc, and I'm going to go to the top view. I'm going to hit T, and I'll zoom in, and I'm just going to try to line this up across, pretty much across the center of the eyes. So I'm going to click and drag across, and I'm going to try to keep that line straight, and then I'm going to pull it out like this. Okay, so mine already has geometry on it. Yours might not, and I'll turn mine off for now. So we're going to have something like that, and we'll center it. So just make sure it's in the middle, and then we'll pull it back out from there. And then I'm going to hit P to go to perspective, so it creates that on the ground. And we'll just move that up close to the character's mouth. Alright, so I'm going to go into the modify panel, and I'm going to actually name this lower teeth. Alright, so from here we're going to turn on under rendering, we're going to turn on enable in renderer, enable in viewport, and you're going to switch it from radial to rectangular, and you can adjust the length, the width. We're not going to adjust the angle, and under interpolation you want to knock this down to 3. So the reason we're going with 3 is because each one of these polygons will represent a tooth, and we want to make sure that there's a seam in the center. Alright, so we can scale this down because it's just a spline, and we can make sure that this is going to fit inside the character's mouth. Okay, so something like that, and then I'll take it back out. And what we're going to do next is we're going to add an edit poly modifier. So the reason we're adding a modifier and not just converting it is so that we can go back and edit the actual spline or the arc, and the edit poly modifier will just stay in the stack for now. So with this shape here, we want to take the bottom polygons, and actually what would be even quicker would be to just grab the back 2 polygons. You can hit delete, and then grab one on the bottom, hold shift to grab the whole loop or ring, and then hit delete. Alright, so now we have what looks like a mouth guard. And then the next part of the setup is to grab an edge, and then we're going to hit ring and loop. That's going to select all the edge loops around the teeth, but we're going to hold Alt and deselect the back edges, because what we're going to do is we're going to extrude these in to create the indents for the teeth. But then what we need to do is subdivide these. These are going to ultimately be attached to the character's face, and they'll be part of the morph targets and everything else later. So you have to keep in mind we're attaching this to Bob's head after. So Bob's head has open subdivision on it with 2 iterations. We're going to add open subdivision with 2 iterations so we can preview what it's going to look like once it's subdivided. Alright, so we're going to go back to editable poly. The edges should still be selected. If you turn off show on result, you'll see that. So while that's selected, we can go into extrude, use extrude settings, and you can hold Alt and adjust the height and just bring the extrusion in slightly. So just enough that you can see the indent in the teeth. Okay, the width will be set to 0. And then that's just a quick, easy way to create a set of cartoon teeth. Then you can click OK. And if you need to adjust the height or anything like that, you can turn off edges now. you can always go back to the arc. You can click hold yes, and you can still adjust the length and the width. So we want these to be teeth. If you want, you can assign a white color or some other color. We'll make them white and just throw them in like this. So they're just going to sit in there like that. And then we're going to mirror and flip these. So we're going to hit mirror. We want to make sure that we're mirroring a copy in the z-axis. And then I'm going to click OK. And that's the upper set of teeth. So we're going to rename this upper. So upper teeth. In the end it won't matter because it's going to get attached to the character. But right now we're just lining things up, making sure that the teeth fit inside the mouth. Okay, so later when we do attach these to the character's head, we're going to have to delete open subdivision. So we can actually go ahead and do that now. I'm going to delete open subdivision and delete it off the bottom set. We'll grab Bob's head. You can just go down to editable poly and click attach, and we'll attach the upper set and lower set of teeth. Alright, so now the color, it takes on the color of whatever material is on the character. So we'll just leave it like that for now. But if I go up to open subdivision, you can see it's subdivided. And we can still access the teeth as an element, and that will be important later when we're setting up morph targets. You could also skin these teeth to separate bones and stuff when you're rigging. But for now we're just going to be focused on morph targets. Alright, so that's the teeth. It's pretty simple to set up. If we hit F4 we can see what it looks like. As you're going, if you want to do test renders, just hit Shift Q and you should be rendering with scanline, but every now and then it's a good idea to just do some test renders. You can even save them out. I like to save progress just to see as I'm working the improvements I'm making. But when you render, you'll actually see if there's any issues with your mesh and you might be able to fix things. So if I go to my left view, I can even make a few adjustments just based off what I've seen in the render. Okay, so I'm going to end up tweaking all this again later, but that's the teeth. I'm going to save this again, and then we'll move on to setting up the eyes. We'll also set up the eyebrows, because they're going to be separate pieces attached as well. So now we'll move on to the eyebrows and the eyes. We'll start with the eyebrows. They're going to be pretty simple to do. And we'll do them, you could again model them any way you want, but we'll use the same technique that we used for the teeth pretty much. So I'm going to hit F, go to the front view. If you want to hit Alt X on the model, you can. And we're going to go up and just use a line. So I'm going to use the line tool, and I'm going to click 3 times to create the eyebrow like this. And I'm going to right click to end the spline. And if I hit P and go to perspective, you can see what that creates here. And it's using basically the same settings that we set up for the teeth, so we can change all of that. I'll hit Alt X on the head and go back to the brow. And we don't need to name it this time because we're just going to end up attaching it. But we will name it just to stay in the habit of things. This will be our brow. So that's the right brow on the character's right side. Alright, so we'll go into the modify panel and we can make some small adjustments in here. So the width and the length. And again, this is going to be subdivided later. So if you add open subdivision, you can just see what it's going to end up looking like with 2 iterations. Alright, so it's super simple. But the line we have here is basically just adding polygons on this side and verts in the middle that we can use to control this with the morph targets later. So if I grab the vertice of the spline, I can move this up and down, and if I turn on show on result, you'll see what that looks like. So we'll be able to deform this to create different expressions with the eyebrows after. So I'm going to turn that off. The only other thing I'll do is I'm going to kind of rotate this around and try to line it up better. So just make sure that it conforms with the character's face or forehead. So you can go in and grab the verts at the either end here, just kind of pull them in, keep the middle one out, and that'll be pretty much it. We just have to reposition it. Just put it somewhere up here like this. It doesn't have to match the drawing perfectly. We just want to make sure these eyebrows are in here and close. So something like that. They can even stick in here a little bit. And just make sure they're sitting up there like that. Okay, might lift that up a little bit more, pull it in. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to mirror it to the other side, but before I do, I'm going to delete the open subdivision modifier. Alright, so I've got that sitting there like that. So this is a spline. I'm going to right click and convert it to editable poly. And you can still make adjustments just by grabbing the verts or the edge loops like this, so you can still move things around. But then I'm going to go up to hierarchy, effect pivot only, and I'm just going to right click on select and move. We'll center it there. Right click on the rotate tool and just center the pivot. Alright, so that drops the pivot down here. If you want, you can move it up just so you can see it. Just move it straight up. But basically we want the pivot point in the center of the world, because we're going to go ahead and mirror this to the other side. So you can hit mirror and you can make a copy, but we want to mirror in the X axis. So we're just flipping it to the other side. And you can click OK. And then we can attach these to the head. Alright, so we've removed open subdivision. So now we can go ahead, we can click on the character. If you want to rename the other side, you can, for the eyebrow. Let's call it left brow. But then we'll click the head, go to editable poly, just click attach, and you can go ahead and attach these eyebrows. So now you'll see them subdivided as well. And just like the teeth, you can grab them as an element, which is good for when we want to animate this later. And also, if we want to apply different textures or colors, we can assign different materials to the elements. Okay, so the eyebrows were easy. Now we're going to go ahead and set up the actual eyeball. And we're actually going to use just a sphere. So we're going to keep it super simple. We're going to use a sphere for the eye. The sphere for the eye doesn't need to deform, except for we're going to use a modifier to stretch it out to give it the cartoony oval shape. I'm going to take this and I'm going to rotate it forward. And if you want, you can right click on the rotate tool and snap it to 90 degrees. But by using the sphere like this, I know I was saying before we don't want to use anything like this that has triangles, but for the eyeball, this is going to be a really simple cartoon style eyeball. We can easily UV map a custom shape on here that we paint in Photoshop, but we could also just color the pupil and then color the rest of the eye white after. So we're keeping this one super simple. I'm going to hit F to go to the front view. We're going to move this up to one of the eyes like this. And we're just going to make sure that this fits inside of here. This is where we might need to go back and conform some of the mesh around the eye, but right now this is too big. So I'll go to the modify panel and just change the radius. I don't want to scale the eyes. Don't use the scale tool on this geometry, because these are going to be linked to the head bone on the cat rig. So it's very important you don't use the scale tool. We want to use the radius only. Alright, so let's try to line this up as best as we can for now. Alright, we can still move this around after. So that kind of fits in there, but we need it to be oval. We can't scale it, and even if we did scale this up, I'm going to hit undo after this. If I rotate this, it's going to rotate on a funny axis and part of it sticks out. So we have to do a completely different setup for this. So if you want, you can save your file real quick before we continue, and then I'm going to show you how to use the warp modifier. And when I say warp modifier, what I actually mean is we're going to go to the create panel, we're going to go to space warps, and we're going to go down under space warps, we're going to hit the drop down menu and go to modifier based. Okay, so in here we're using a space warp modifier, and we're going to use the stretch modifier. So you're going to click on this. This is active. I'm just going to scroll out a bit. We're going to click and drag to create this as if we're creating a box. And then we're going to use the align tool and align it to the sphere. Alright, so we're going to align it by the centers in the X, Y, and Z. Click OK. And then we're going to go into the modify panel and resize it. So we want this to line up as close as we can get it to the size of the actual sphere. So we want to make sure it's just a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to say we'll just go with 2 3/4 or whatever matches the closest to your sphere, and then just copy and paste so it's the same in the length, width, and height. Okay. And then we'll align it again, and we're aligning it by the centers, not the pivot point in this case, because the pivot point of this modifier is actually at the bottom. So we want the center of the object lined up with the center of the sphere in the X, Y, and Z. Click apply and OK. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take the sphere, or the eye, and we're going to hold Control, keep our modifier selected. You can right click and isolate selection, so we're just going to isolate these for a minute. This makes it easier to work with. So what we need to do now is we're using a space warp modifier, and if you go up here under link, you're going to see select and link, unlink selection, and bind to space warp. This is how you link space warps together in 3ds Max. So whether it's a particle system or anything else like that, you're going to use this just like the link tool, but we're linking space warps. So you're going to click on the stretch modifier and then click and drag and let go on the sphere. And you'll notice if you click on the sphere, it now has a stretch binding world space modifier. That's what WSM stands for. So I'm going to rename the sphere to right eye. Normally I would name it Bob Right Eye. If you're going to have multiple characters in the scene, you should name it with the character. So it could actually be right eye underscore Bob. That way it's easy to find. It's up to you how you name it as far as that goes. If you want to name it Bob underscore right eye, that way in your layer manager you see everything related to Bob because his name comes up first. That's fine. If we go into the space modifier, the stretch modifier, you can try adjusting stretch and you'll see what that does. So it'll squash and stretch. You can animate these parameters, by the way. And then you can adjust amplify and you can pull that back out. Alright, so now we've got an oval eye. Before I get out of isolation mode, go ahead and grab the sphere and just try to rotate it. You'll notice that it stays conformed to that area within the stretch modifier. Alright, so we're going to hit undo, going to right click and end isolate. Now we need to select both pieces, and when we're moving the eye we need to know to always select the two pieces together because they're bound together. If I only grab the modifier and move this, it's going to affect the eye. So you have to keep them together, and we can't link them together, but they will both get linked to the head bone on the cat rig later. Alright, so now we have this eye sitting in here. It's pretty nice, fits not too bad. You can still adjust things later. If you want to give this a different color, you can change the color for now. Later on we'll add some materials to it. And if you hit F4, you can see the eye just sitting in there. Hit F4 again, and now if we rotate just the eye on its own, it stays within that oval eye shape. Alright, so we can take this and we can just simply copy it to the other side. Just hold Shift and drag a copy like that, and then drop it in place. We're going to name this left eye. This is Bob's left eye. And we should actually name the space warps as well. So we're going to call this stretch underscore left eye. And then this will be stretch underscore right eye. And again, if you have multiple characters that are using the same object type, just put the character's name at the beginning. So Bob stretch right eye, and then Bob stretch left eye. That way if you merge things into a scene, everything's not using the same naming conventions, and you won't have issues with binding things to the rig later. Okay, so we're just about there with the eyes. We can set up a look at constraint, which we will do soon. At this point we will save the file again. I'm gonna keep telling you to save the file because we don't want to lose any work. And then we'll just go ahead and quickly set up a look at constraint for this. So before we do that, let's just add materials to this for now. Ideally we want to create a texture map for the eyes because this area here, the pupil, is oval, and if you want it to be round, you're gonna have to paint that on there. But for now, just to make it quick and easy, we'll go ahead and create a new material. Call it Bob Eye White. Just change it to white, and then we'll do Bob Eye Pupil. And we will make that black. And I'm going to go into the sphere, and to add the material, we're just going to drag the material over like this. But to change this area in here, we could have converted this to editable poly. If you add an edit poly modifier in here now, you'll see it'll just sit there like that. But with edit poly modifiers, you can't just go in and change things like this. I'm going to turn off show and result. If you have show and result on, you're going to see stretch binding affects only the selected polygon. So that's something to keep in mind. So if I was to grab some polygons here and I try to assign this, it assigns it to the whole object. So when you're using the edit poly modifier, you actually have to set up IDs. But if we right click on the edit poly modifier and choose collapse to, you can click hold yes. It just bakes that down, and now it's an editable poly at the bottom. So you can turn on show and result and you'll see that this still works perfectly fine. The only difference is if we turn that off, now we can go in here and I'll just quickly select this. If I grab a ring like that, you can hit grow and then shrink twice. Otherwise you can use by angle to select that area. And then if I assign this, it'll assign it only to the selected polygons. So that's the difference between assigning materials to editable poly versus the edit poly modifier. This automatically creates a new ID. With edit poly, it wants you to already have those polygon or those material IDs set up. Alright, so we can turn this off. We can go back up to stretch binding, and there's our eye. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So basically we're going to sphere. Show and result is turned off. We're going to add an edit poly modifier, and then we'll just right click and collapse to, hold yes, that bakes it down to editable poly. Now you can select your area in here, so I just did that by grabbing a ring, hitting grow, shrink twice, apply your pupil material, turn off polygon, and then go back up to stretch binding. Now if you select your eyes, this time you can hit F4 and you'll be able to see what he's looking at. You can rotate these like this. So I'm rotating these together under view, so they're not going to work the way you think they should. You'd have to switch this to local, and then you're just rotating the eyes locally. Okay, so let's just hit undo on that. Okay, so if I do them one at a time, everything works fine. If I try to do them together, oops, you can see it's a little wonky, and this is going to be because of the space warp. It's not going to agree with the local axis anymore, but that's why we're going to set up a look at constraint. So we're going to create controllers so that we don't have to select the eyes at all. We're just going to animate the eyes using controllers, and that's easy enough. I'll save the video and mark this as a chapter in case you want to bookmark it. So let's save, and then we'll set up the look at constraint from here. Alright, so for the look at constraints for Bob, we're just going to keep this simple. We're going to go into the helpers. So in the create panel, you can go over to this little icon here, helpers, and we're going to look for a dummy object. So I'm going to click and drag to create the dummy object, and you can just create it kind of tiny like this, roughly the size of the eye or close to. I'm going to use the align tool, and we'll align it to the center of the eye. Make sure you check X, Y, and Z. Click OK, and then we'll just move this out like that. If you want to make sure both sides are exactly the same, then what we'll do is we'll take this one and we'll drag a copy of it over first, and then we'll align this to the other eye. Click OK, and then we'll select both dummy objects and we'll just move them straight out from there. Okay, so we're going to drop them right about here. So with the dummy objects, these are actually safe to scale. So if I grab both of these and switch this to local, you can scale these up or down as long as when you're in the scale tool you switch this to local. And these are going to be your controllers for the eyes. So you can actually use any object as a controller. So if you wanted to use a text tool and make R for right and L for left, or set up any kind of other controller to use, that would be totally fine. But for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to use these dummy objects. So I'm going to click on the first one. We'll call it Bob right eye CTRL for control. Then I'm going to copy that and paste it to the other one. Just change the R to an L. And then we need to set up a look at constraint for the eyeball to look at the dummy object. So if you click on the first eye, you can go up to animation constraints, and we'll use the look at constraint, and then click on the dummy object, and at first it'll flip the eye around. So all you have to do is, this will bring you right into the motion panel where the look at constraint is set up, and you can just go down and click keep initial offset. That'll keep the eye in the original rotation. And this blue line is the view line length, so you can scale that back with this option here. And if you don't want that on at all, then you can just set it to 0. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this eye. So click this eye here. We're going to go up to animation constraints, look at constraint, click on the other controller. It's going to flip it around, so we'll turn on keep initial offset, And I'm going to turn off I'm going to set the view line length to 0. Alright, so now if you click on your controllers and you move them around, the eyes follow. So you can move them together, move them individually like this, and if you wanted to, you could create another shape or object to link them to so that you can animate them together, but just grabbing them both like this is fine. And that's the eyeballs linked up. So once we set up the cat rig, we're going to have a head bone. The eyes, the stretch modifiers, and these look at constraints are all going to get linked to the head bone. So you don't attach any of this to the head. This all will just sit here until we set up the rig. Okay, so at this point you can go around and finesse the mesh for the character if you want to make it smoother. There's only really two things left to do as far as the character's head goes. We need to model the hair, and we need to extend the neck down so that it will cover underneath the shirt here. So we'll do the hair next, and then we'll end it with the chest plate underneath. And then that will wrap up the modeling part for the head. And then the next lesson is going to be modeling the body. So I'm going to save this again, and then we'll move on to modeling the hair. Alright, so for the hair, we could start as simple as just creating a box and box model the hair. You could also model from a plane and pull the edges around, but I'm going to show you kind of a quick way you can grab some polygons off the character's head, and we'll detach and start modeling the hair from something that's already existing. So if you go to the left view and hit Alt X, I'm just going to select all the polygons on the top and the back side of Bob's head, and I'll go back into perspective. You can hit Alt X again. So we've just grabbed some polygons off the top of his head, and I'm going to go over here and hit detach. I'm going to name this Bob hair, and we're going to make this a clone, so it's a completely separate object. So I'll click OK, and then I'm going to click on the hair, and we can just start modeling from this basic shape already. And to push this even further, you can go ahead and add the shell modifier. So if you go down here and find shell, the shell modifier is just going to push this out or in. So we're going to push this out and just create some blocked in geometry to start with for the hair. And you can keep the shell modifier up on the top here and drop back down to edit poly. And if you go to the left view again, you can start pushing and pulling these verts around and kind of shaping this a little bit better. And just try to use the shape of the hair that's already here in the drawing. So if you want, you can take the head underneath and just hide it for now, and then focus on the hair only. And I can just, at this point, you can cut in as many edges as you need. So if I want another edge loop up here, I can grab this ring of edges and hit connect. Click OK, and then this can act as the indent up here. Might grab these ones and pull them up a bit. Just kind of line things up. And then when you go to your shell modifier, you can keep pushing and pulling verts around and cutting in edges and all that stuff. But again, if I go back to edit poly, maybe I'll throw another edge through here. Just keep this one kind of tight up here. And in fact, I'll put another one underneath there. And then if I go to the shell modifier, I can start pushing and pulling those edges in and out. So you can kind of block things in like that. If you want to add an edit poly modifier on top of shell so you don't lose everything in the stack, you can. But once I kind of quickly rough things in, I'll just convert this to editable poly, and then I'll just start moving things around from there. So you can hit Alt X, and now I have geometry that I can push around. So this is the outside part of that shell modifier that we've collapsed, and I'm just pulling the mesh around from here. So you can give Bob any kind of hairdo you want, really, but just to practice, we're going to try and get it as close to the drawing as we can. Okay, so don't forget to rotate around and see how things are looking. And I might need to bring Bob back, so I'm going to unhide all, and then make sure this is conforming to his head properly. Because if you look in the front view, you can even hit F, you'll see how his hair kind of puffs out to the side there. So I'm going to have to start pulling some of the verts here out too. And we're going to subdivide this at the end, so you can always add the open subdivision modifier on there as well. And that'll give you a better idea of how the hair is starting to look. If you want to use symmetry, because I'm only working on one half, this is where you could add the symmetry modifier. So we'll go ahead and add symmetry, and if you're working on this side, it automatically mirrors the other side, so you'll have to hit flip, and we'll try and do this one just using the symmetry modifier. So you can turn show end result on. If you drop down to edit poly, turn that on, and just continue to push and pull verts and kind of sculpt the hair in here. So another tip is to use soft selection. So if you go into soft selection, you can turn this on. And if I turn this off for now, if you're using soft selection, you can adjust the fall off, and it's just going to reach out to some of the verts around and gradually fall off and allow you to move large sections of the model. So if you turn this down a bit, it'll affect less of the surrounding verts, and you can kind of blend things together like that. And again, you can add as many edges as you need to get the shape you're looking for, because this is a separate piece. And we could attach this hair to Bob's head after, but we're going to keep it separate, and we're going to end up linking it to the head bone along with the eyes and the controllers for the eyes. This way the hair will be separate, and when we do our morph targets, we're not copying out the hair with the head. So if you had a special case where the hair is part of your character's morph targets, then you might want to attach it in there. So maybe if the character's hair blended into a beard or part of sideburns that came down into a mustache or something, then you might need to include that in the morph targets, and then you would attach it. Okay, so again, we're using symmetry. As I'm pulling this in, if I turn on show end result, the other side's going to update. I have soft selection turned on, and we're just kind of sculpting away here. Going to keep turning show end result on and off so I can see what's going on down here. In tight cases like this, I'll probably turn off soft selection, just kind of manually spread things out a bit. And if I want to keep that crease in there nice and tight, just push that back in, show end result. And I might grab this whole edge here and lift it up a bit. And at any point, if you're modeling away on the one side and your symmetry side is starting to look messed up, you can always right click on symmetry and you can hit collapse to, and that will bake symmetry in. Just click hold yes, and then both sides should be the same after that. And then you can always add symmetry back on again. Just don't forget to hit flip if you're working on the character's right side. Okay, so I'll quickly go in here and just kind of pull these around. Try to reshape things. For the inside edges, you can push these kind of into the head. We'll just hide these verts inside the character's head. The other option for hair would be to take this geometry into a sculpting program like Mudbox, 3D Coat, or ZBrush. And we'll be getting into 3D Coat this semester. And I'll be showing you different techniques for sculpting and retopologizing. But it's very important to understand how to do the low poly modeling technique first, so that you understand where edges need to be, because when we retopologize a high poly sculpt, you need to know where you're putting the new edges. Especially if you're going to be rigging a character, you need to know where those edge loops need to be. You need to know which parts are going to deform, and usually the toughest parts are going to be shoulders and armpits and areas like that on the character. Okay, so we're getting there. Just gonna push these around a little bit more. Probably won't fuss with it too much. You can spend as much time as you need to get this to work. I'm gonna kind of just get it close, and then I'll move on just for the sake of the video, so it's not too long. So I might come back here and pull some of this out a little bit. And again, this is where it's great to have open subdivision and be able to turn on show end result, so you can see what's going on underneath. Alright, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. I could always come back in and tweak this later. Maybe, oops, just grab this little part here, kind of pull his sideburn area in a little more to cover his face better on the side of his head. Alright, so let's have a look at what's going on here. If I go up to symmetry, you can already see this is what I was talking about before with symmetry doing things we don't want it to do. Sometimes it doesn't weld that middle seam properly, so this is a problem. I'm going to delete symmetry. I'm going to delete open subdivision. I'm going to go to the front view and I'll just isolate the hair. And just to make sure it's perfectly clean, I'm going to delete half of this. I'll turn off polygons and I'll just look around, make sure there's nothing weird happening. This should be open. Alright, so everything looks good there. I'm going to hit F, and then I'm going to use the mirror tool, and we'll mirror a new copy. So this will be a copy mirrored in the x-axis. Alright, and then I'll take the original half of the hair, Bob's hair, and then we'll attach the new half again, and we'll weld this up. So you can see where some of the verts have been pulled away from the center, and that's what the problem was. If I grab these two verts here, I can scale them back together on the x-axis, but you can just click and drag, grab all the verts down the middle, scale them in tight, and then just hit weld. Okay, you can hit weld settings again, and if you want to reset it and tap it up one. Alright, so we're using the lowest increment. That way it doesn't weld all the verts together down the back or front. And then I'm going to hit P, right click, end isolate. And I'm going to call that done for now. Again, you can spend more time on the hair. I just want to move on. Maybe I'll fix this up later off video. If you want to add some color, you can add some color for the hair and just make a material and throw it on there. Don't forget to add open subdivision back on. And then if you hit F4, we could do some renders and just see what it looks like so far. Hit Shift Q. Okay, so open subdivision should be set to 2. And that's not too bad for now. Alright, so I could tweak this a bit, but that's not too bad. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to extend his neck so we have a little chest plate. And I actually almost forgot his glasses too, so we're going to add the glasses. So that'll be the last step for this video and the last part of this first assignment. So we're going to extend the neck, do the glasses, and then this is what you will hand in at the end. So for the neck extension, let's just go to the left view and we'll select Bob's head. We're going to go down to editable poly and we can just grab this open border at the bottom here. So just remember this is open. It should be open. There shouldn't be a polygon back there. So if we grab the border here, we can almost follow the drawing again, but we're going to hold shift and we're going to drag. So notice when we shift and drag, there's no smoothing groups applied. Okay, so the mesh looks rough. We're going to have to go in here later and apply smoothing groups. So we'll select the polygons and we'll find smoothing groups in there after. But for now, we're going to go ahead and pull this neck area out. And we'll just extrude this a couple of times. And we're going to rotate as we go. You can hit F4 to see your edges. And then we'll do one more. Okay, so we've got something like that. But if you go to your front view, and before we do, we'll just rotate this again. Make sure it follows the line of the body. So if you hit F, go to the front view. You can see we still have to come down here. If we model the collar of Bob's shirt with this V-neck, we need to make sure that the neck or chest area of the head is included in there if we're going to keep it separate. So we'll just pull this down here like that, and we'll use the scale tool and scale this out a bit just to make sure it covers that area. Okay, so we're going to just pull this down. We can fix this later when we actually model his body, but for now we're just using the drawing. And we can go up here, just make sure that this is scaled out enough. You can hit Alt X and try to make sure this all lines up. That part you might not need to scale. Go to the left view so you can see how far down this ended up. Okay, so you can grab that as edges or a border, but we'll move this back towards the middle here. And I'm going to pull this one down. Try to spread these out, but like I said, we'll end up pushing this stuff around later on. Once we actually model the body, we can make sure this all fits in here nicely. So just try to space it out the best you can for now. Normally you wouldn't have to extend the neck this far with a regular character, but with Bob's weird neck and this V neck area on the shirt, we're going to have to hide this inside the body after. So that's as far as we need to go. So we have something like that for now. Even if you just get it to this point, this is fine at this point. I might go in here and just kind of scale this out a bit. This is where you're going to switch it to local and scale it out this way and just get it closer to the edge of his body. And this one inside, we're going to end up probably having to scale that down later. So we'll just leave it like this And I might just rotate this around a bit, just try to fix it as much as you can. And that's as far as we really need to go with this for now. Okay, so like I say, we will come back to this part later. This is an extension that we're going to need to have underneath his shirt. So we don't want to have too much geometry under there because we need to copy his head out a bunch of times later for the morph targets. Alright, so we'll leave that piece in there now for the neck. And again, if you turn on Open Subdivision, this is what it looks like for now. Looks kind of weird, but we're going to fix that up later. And then if we go to the front view, we can go ahead and model the glasses. And if you want to just grab the head, hit Alt-X. Okay, looking from the front view, I can see where I need to pull that hair out more, but we'll do that after. For the glasses, we're just going to use some lines. And in fact, you can start with any shape in here. You can use the circle if you want. If you click and drag to create a circle like this, then we can edit that circle after. And we actually don't need Bob's head here at all, so let's just hide Bob's head. And we will hide the rest of this stuff as well. And just focus on the glasses. Okay, so if you click on your circle, you can actually right click and convert this to an editable spline. And then you can expand it from up here and we can grab the verts. If you want to turn off enable in viewport and renderer for now, then we can start moving the vertices around like this. So you can push and pull the verts to try to get the shape. And then the verts have a Bezier handle on them, which you can pull in and out like this. And you can get pretty close to the shape here. If you increase the number of steps, then you can increase under interpolation. You can increase the quality of your line. So you can go up as far as 9 or 10 for this. And we can just mess around with these handles, try to get this shape as close as possible. You can also use the rotate tool to rotate handles. You can use the scale tool to scale the handles in and out. If you wanted to, you could insert a vertex if you need to. You can use insert and you can insert a vertex in here as well. Okay, so I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to turn on enable in renderer and viewport and then adjust the radius. So I'm going to set that to radial and then the thickness down to match the glasses a bit closer. Okay, so you can get it something like this. It's pretty close. And then I'm just going to take this side and mirror it over. So I'll use mirror. If you want, you can take your pivot point first. So go to Effect Pivot, switch that to View, and then center your pivot. Just don't center the Z, we'll keep it up there. X and Y will be set to 0. Turn off Effect Pivot only, and then we can mirror a copy to the other side. Okay, so again, you can thicken these up if you want to, or leave them like this. We're not going to make arms that go down to his ears because that would end up looking really strange. We're going to cheat and we're just going to have this part in the middle for the bridge of the nose. So we could model that in, or we could model a separate piece. It just depends how you want to do this. If you want to model that over, let's just first make sure that this lines up. So let's take these and move them out, and then we'll right click, unhide all, and we'll just make sure that these sit in the right spot. So if we go to the left view, remember we were actually lining the eyes up in the left view, so we'll put them here, maybe rotate them out to kind of match the drawing a bit, then go back to perspective. Okay, so let's hit undo on that. When I rotate it, I should have had that set to view, not local. And then we'll go to perspective. Alright, so if you want, you can save it now, just in case. If you want to go back and make changes to the glasses before we convert it to editable poly. But at this point, I'll take these and convert them to editable poly. I'm going to attach them together. So we'll use attach. And then I'll show you a quick way to bridge across the middle here. Alright, so we need to make sure we line this up in the right spot. Okay, so this is where I could go back to Bob's face later as well and extend the bridge of his nose up here. But we're going to go in here and I'm just going to grab a couple polygons on the inside here. And I'll delete those on both pieces. And if you select by border, you can select one border and then we can just use bridge. And if you actually select both borders at the same time and hit bridge, it'll automatically fill it in. And then if you wanted to add any kind of curve in there or bend the glasses in the middle, you just need to add some edges. So you can hit connect. And I would maybe connect 3 edges in there if I was going to bend it. And then you could double click on one of the edge loops and just kind of pull it out like this if you want a curve in there. Alright, so if you wanted to round this out, you could always grab these edges here and just push them up. Maybe grab the edges underneath here, pull them down. And if you want to make it even rounder, you could put an edge loop through here and then pull those out, but I'm going to leave it like that for now. Alright, so at this point I'm going to hit F4 and we'll make a black material for the glasses. So I didn't name this should be Bob's hair. That was Bob's eye, we'll make Bob glasses. So later on, once we're finished with modeling the body and everything, we're going to unwrap all of this and paint it. But for now, I'm just throwing colors on here to see what it looks like. Okay, so it kind of looks like his glasses are too big. So if you want to scale it down at this point, we're going to link this to the head bone along with the hair and eyes later. So don't scale the object. If you need to scale this down, the safe way to scale at this point is to select the whole thing as an element. You can scale at the sub-object level without messing up the transform of the object. But if you scale the object on its own, you're going to run into problems later when we're rigging if we try linking it to other objects. You'll notice when you rotate things that they warp and skew. So this is the only safe way to scale an object if you plan on rigging it or linking it to something. So I'm going to use scale in view, and you can just scale the glasses down a bit, try to make it look better. And that's pretty much it for now. If you wanted to make different glasses or stylize them somehow, you could do that for fun. Might scale those down a little bit more. Just try to make better sense of them. We're not going to put glass in there, we're just cheating here. It's just very simple glasses frame. And then when we render, it's going to look something like that. Alright, so that is pretty much it. The last thing you should do is we'll just make different colors. So we'll make a skin color. And we're just going to throw these on the character just to separate it before you would hand this in. So if I drag that on here, then I'm going to make his eyebrows different. So if you go into editable poly, grab his eyebrows like this, then you can assign that hair texture or that hair material. And this one up here was for his eyes. I'll make a new one for his teeth. Bob teeth. And then I'll select the element for the teeth. Okay, so I'll turn this off so you can see it better, and then assign that. And then I just remembered we need to also set the smoothing groups down here. So we don't have smoothing groups on a lot of the areas on the mesh. So what we're going to do is select Bob's head as an element like this. So this selects all the polygons, and then if you scroll down, you should see something that looks like a calendar. It's called polygon smoothing groups. So I'm going to clear all and set everything to group 1. Okay, so Bob's head is organic. It should all smooth together as one organic piece. So everything's in group 1. Okay, so now even without open subdivision, it looks smoother. But if we jump up to open subdivision with 2 iterations, it looks like this. And this is without any lighting, just default lighting in the scene. So that's not too bad. I could go through and tweak his nose, and you should spend more time tweaking things to make it look as much like the concept as possible. But this is exactly what I want you to hand in for the project. If you can get everything set up like this, then you can just hand in the 3ds Max file for this part. After this, we're going to move on to modeling the body and the pants, and then we'll do the hands and the shoes separate, and then we can start to set up the rig for this character. Alright, so hopefully you managed to follow along all the way through and get to this point, and if you have any questions, make sure you contact me, either email or Discord, and if you have problems, we can work it out there.